You're listening to episode 49 of Literacy in Color. Today, I'm joined by Jen and Wendy of Informed Literacy, two powerhouse educators with over 40 years of combined experience in classrooms and as reading interventionists. Jen and Wendy are Wilson certified, credentialed dyslexia practitioners, passionate science of reading advocates, and co-authors of a beautiful series of decodable books. Through their work as reading specialists, they've supported a wide range of learners from general education to special education to even multilingual students. And they're on a mission to equip teachers and families with practical, research-aligned tools to ensure every child finds reading success. Today, we're digging into the concept of set for variability, also known as mispronunciation correction, and how it plays a crucial role in helping students become flexible, successful readers. Welcome to the Literacy in Color podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Sullivan, a science of reading advocate with over a decade of experience as a reading interventionist and literacy coach. I'm passionate about making evidence-based instruction both effective and engaging. If you're interested in captivating our learners on reading fluently and understanding language, or as I like to call it, keeping it colorful, then you've found the right place. Each week, we'll explore intriguing lit bits and practical strategies around the science of reading and structured literacy to help you be colorful and teach colorfully. Are you ready to bring literacy to life? Let's color outside the lines and make an impact together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Literacy in Color. Today, we are joined by two seasoned reading interventionists, Wendy Darasz and Jen Yagid, and they are the faces behind Informed Literacy. And today, we're going to be chatting about mispronunciation correction or set for variability. And those terms seem to cause a bit of confusion in literacy circles. So Jen and Wendy are here to inform us and educate us and give us some practical tips on what this actually looks like in practice with students. So first of all, welcome to the show, Jen and Wendy. It is such a pleasure to be chatting with you both today.
Thanks. It's great to be here. We're really excited.
So maybe we can start off just by defining what set for variability is exactly. Sometimes people call this mispronunciation correction, and the terminology can feel a little overwhelming for teachers. So perhaps you can define it in a teacher-friendly way.
Sure. So when we first heard the term, it felt very scary and technical. However, as we researched more, it's just a fancy way of telling kids to be flexible in their self-corrections. It's a reading strategy that uses the students' oral vocabulary, which is the words that they know, to correct mispronunciation of a word that they're trying to decode. So it's pretty simple. It just seems scary in terms of, the set for variability, but it's just basically flexing. And being flexible.
So maybe you can walk us through a concrete example of what this would look like in action.
So I have two examples. The first example is like with a very beginning reader. When generally with very beginning readers, we start with the short vowel sound in a CVC pattern. And so beginning readers tend to apply those short vowel sounds to every vowel they see. So if they come across a word like they read the sentence, I have a pet, and they come across the word have, a lot of beginning readers tend to go, have. I have a pet. And they know that have doesn't make sense. Now, a lot of readers have the word have in their oral vocabulary, and so they naturally flex the pronunciation and can self-correct. I have a pet, and that makes much more sense. The second example is students who are a little more proficient at reading, and they're reading multisyllabic words, and they come across the two-syllable word, say blossom. The blossom was on the plant. Now, some students would use code to decode the word blossom, and they might not know the schwa, so they might say blossom. Now, the students who have blossom as part of their oral vocabulary are going to flex that sound and make it into a word they know, blossom. Other students might not have that vocabulary yet. And then it's incumbent upon the teacher to say, well, this word has a schwa at the end. It's pronounced blossom. Give them the pronunciation and then also take that opportunity to teach into the vocabulary so that the student can grow their vocabulary as well.
That's really helpful. And I appreciate your two examples, how you had a beginning reader example and a more advanced example, so that we can see this strategy being used across all different grade levels. And I really appreciate the tip of the hat to that oral language piece too, because if a student doesn't have the word in their oral language, it doesn't mean that the strategy necessarily can't be employed. It would mean that then the teacher steps in and provides that word in oral language too. So we can see it numerous ways, which I appreciate. And I also love your primary example with have, because I was thinking about how students, once they learn silent E, they overextend that learning to every single VCE pattern that they see. But we know that silent E has so many different jobs. And one of them is to ensure that V doesn't come at the end of English words. And so it's not the word have. And when they would read, I have a cat, they're like, wait, that doesn't quite make sense. Right?
Exactly. Yep.
So why is set for variability such an important strategy for our proficient readers to have?
So we know that proficient readers use the code and the correct pronunciation to solve unknown words. And this strategy is super important because we always say the world's not decodable. So they have to know, students have to know and need to be flexible when reading, and they have to have the strategies to solve those unknown words. So set for variability provides students with a process that promotes the reading flexibility.
The world is not decodable.
The world is not decodable.
It's so true. Mm-hmm. And so when we're thinking about using this strategy, are there any prerequisite skills that students would have to have in place?
So there are several prerequisite skills that you need to put this in place. So we all know that strong phonemic awareness skills are a predictor of reading success, and exposure to those various sounds through phonemic awareness activities is super important because it lays the groundwork for accessing various sounds when reading. Explicit phonics instruction is another really critical prerequisite. Kids need to have decoding and encoding skills under their belts before they can even be flexible, really. And decoding is always the first strategy of the strong readers. Otherwise, it's just the good old guessing and checking. And then, like Wendy mentioned, building the strong oral vocabulary is also really critical because they can flex the pronunciation all day long. But if the word's not part of their oral language vocabulary, then they're not going to solve the word. And then they're going to need the teacher to step in and help them and provide some context for that word.
That's really helpful. So we want to keep in mind, we need phonemic awareness skills, we need that phonics, we need that code down, and we need the oral language piece. And language is such a critical component of literacy success, and I feel like we don't talk about it nearly enough. Students have to have that language in order to read the word. So I always think it's important that we stay grounded in the research and what the research has to say about these things that we hear in the science of reading world, right? So what does the research say about set for variability?
So several studies have been done on set for variability. The first thing that has been uncovered is that we know that strong decoders and word readers are better at this skill because they can rely more on the various patterns of words to help flex the sounds. The second thing is, like Jen said, research shows that phonemic awareness, phonics, and a strong oral vocabulary lead to application of set for variability, more success with the application of set for variability. And the third thing is that set for variability is a predictor of word reading success, and it can be improved upon through instruction. So it's important to teach both decoding and encourage that flexible thinking about how words work. So it's both components are of important for teaching reading. And I like to say it's a two-pronged approach, right? You get decoding first, and then if you need to, you got to flex those sounds to make it into a word that makes sense. And as students become exposed to more phonics patterns, they are better able to use that flexing strategy. But it's really important that those students who struggle with word recognition get explicit instruction in both the phonics and the flexibility. It's not either decoding or flexibility, it's both.
Yeah, I love how you said it's a two-pronged approach. As soon as you said that, I was thinking of all these devices that we use day to day, like your alarm clock. And I have my alarm clock plugged into the wall, and sometimes the power goes out and then my time goes out. But, I have batteries in there as a backup just in case. And
Right.
so, we think about decoding as our first line of defense. That's our main power source. And then when that isn't fitting in that particular scenario, we have some backup options to be flexible.
Jen likes to say, decoding gets your foot in the door, right? If you don't have decoding, your foot's not going to get in the door. But once you've done that, you have to rely on the second strategy. We also have some links to those studies if you want us to send you those links.
Yeah, definitely. I would love that.
Great.
And we often hear about the theory of orthographic mapping and having these words turned into sight words in our brain so that we could read them with automaticity. And there's also this idea of statistical learning, how eventually we end up being proficient enough in the code that we start teaching words ourselves. David Scher's whole self-teaching hypothesis. So how does set for variability fit into those pieces of the puzzle as well?
So orthographic mapping is the process in the brain when you're connecting sounds to a word, to the letters that spell it and link it to its meaning. And statistical learning, like you said, is how our brain naturally notices patterns and what we see and hear. So we have an example just to kind of highlight how this might work. So let's say a student is learning to read and comes across the words light, night, fight. Okay. When they come up to the word light, they might first initially say ligit. And usually you just get that look and they have no clue, right? So then they might eventually either the teacher supporting them saying, oh, that word's light. And then they'll see night and then they'll see fight. And then after a while, they're going to internalize the fact that IGH pattern through that statistical learning, that IGH pattern is going to spell I. And so when they see sight, tight, and might, they might just pick it up that, oh, well, it worked with the first group of words. So now I'm noticing these patterns, my brain's seeing these patterns, and that's the statistical learning that the brain's picked up on the common letter patterns just by hearing and seeing repeatedly and in meaningful contexts. And once they're able to read those words automatically, they've been orthographically mapped. There is a caveat that we wanted to address though. So statistical learning, it varies greatly among students. So like a struggling reader, it's going to take them many more repetitions and many more times seeing that word before it's orthographically mapped oftentimes. And so some kids can just pick it up right away. And that's those kids that are those more natural readers. They just kind of pick it up. They see the pattern and you can keep moving with it. But the other students, they require explicit instruction of that pattern and possibly more explicit instruction than others.
Yeah. You think about how our brains are these natural pattern seekers. And when we see that IGH and even the IGHT, that's words, they're going to pick up, if I could read this word, then maybe this works for the next word I see with that same letter string. So that's a really, really helpful tip there. Before you talked about how sometimes students refer on that good old guessing game, which, gosh, isn't that such a hard habit to break? And some people will compare set for variability. Well, aren't you just teaching kids to guess at the word? But it's not, right? So how would you distinguish the two from 3Qing MSV, how this differs?
So set for variability is a very different approach than MSV. Set for variability is a phonics first method. So they get their foot in the door with the phonics, and then it doesn't require the student to look at the picture and think about what makes sense and read past the word and think of another word that could make sense or look at the first letter and guess. It does none of that. It requires the student to use the code and then flex the sound. So again, it's that two-prong approach. The problem with MSV is it makes the reader's eyes bounce around the page. Set for variability keeps reader's eyes focused on the text because that's where the reading happens, in the text, right? So it's a very different approach. It is not guessing and checking.
I love that. And I read an article who was like, the best clue about the word is the word itself. We always want to keep our eyes on the word, and anything that's going to detract away from the word, it's not a strategy that we really want to be using for word recognition. When we think about the whole concept of MSV, like, does it look right? Does it sound right? Does it make sense? Those kinds of questions are not necessarily bad questions, but they shouldn't be used in the context of decoding.
Right.
So when we're decoding and we're lifting the words off the page, we always have to look closely at those letter strings. And sometimes it's phonics related, sometimes it's morphologically related, sometimes we have to use some flexibility and we have those schwa sounds, but we always have to look at the word because the word is what's going to give us the clue.
Exactly. Yep.
Some teachers might be wondering if set for variability is this natural cognitive process that students will automatically be able to do, or if it's something that we as teachers can explicitly teach students to do. So what does the research have to say, or maybe even what does your experience have to say?
So that's an interesting question because it's actually a little bit of both. Right. As Jen mentioned, the statistical learning, it shows that our brains love patterns, and some students more naturally pick up on those patterns. They have a stronger oral vocabulary, so they can naturally, or they're more skilled at that set for variability and flexing the sounds. And all students can be explicitly taught how to use the code first and then flex for the right sounds. It can be as simple as reminding the student to try a different sound, right? That's not working. Can you think of another sound that would make more sense? In our decodable books that Jen and I have worked on and written, and we mark the words that have untaught patterns or irregular patterns with a star. So that's a clue to the student and the teacher that this is a pattern that the student might not be familiar with. So it kind of relieves a little bit of that pressure on those beginning readers. So we approach it one of three different ways, depending on the student. So we work a lot with struggling and beginning readers. Some of those students frustrate very, very quickly. So if they come to the word, let's say it's like, and they don't know the word like, if we know that that student is going to give up really quickly, we can just say, you don't know that pattern yet, that word is like, and they can move on. Other students, if they're reading along and they come to the word coin, we know that they haven't been taught the OI diphthong yet. So we can say to them, so that is a pattern we haven't taught yet. If that pattern says oi. So can you try to tap that word out? Coin. Oh, coin. And another student might read the sentence, I gave the shopkeeper a coin. They might come to the word coin and use a pattern they already know, like cone, and it doesn't make sense. And then they can automatically flex because they already have the word coin in their vocabulary and they're just ready to do that. It really depends on the student. I always say teachers are really good at kid watching, and they know what their students need. And so they can kind of move along with their students and help the student build some independence.
Yeah, I appreciate that there's not just this one size fits all or one right answer approach to things, because I think we can all reflect on times we're sitting at the small group table and there's times where a student, it feels so troubled by the words and it's very laborious, and you just tell them. There's no harm. You just tell them.
Right.
And we want to make certain reading experiences not so frustrating for our students. So you take some of that heavy lifting away by giving them some scaffolding there. And there's other times, I'm thinking about my daughter. She's in pre-K. She's in this beginner reader stage. And sometimes we do come across obscure patterns like AW. And I just say, oh, AW says aw, like they love each other. Let's put it together. Aw. And she's like, saw. And she didn't learn that yet. She's reading CVC words, but
Right.
It comes up and we address it,
Right.
So I appreciate all the different kinds of experiences that this can lean into. So I love all of those different examples. And you referenced that we can teach into set for variability. So what are some maybe practical ways that we can build students' flexibility when they're reading?
So in addition to what Wendy had mentioned, one thing that I like to do that we both like to do in the small reading group is just incorporate a hand signal. I'm big on hand signals in the classroom, just as a visual cue. So basically you would have, obviously on the podcast, they won't be able to see, but if you put your palms facing up and you'll say, so let's say the student is stuck on a word and they need a reminder to flex. So you have your hand palm side up and then just flip it over, palm side down. So that for them, they know, oh, I'll need to, obviously you'll teach into it, but I'll know that that's a cue that I need to flex the sound in an effort to not stop, launch off into an explanation and have a lot of discourse about flexing it. It's just, whoop, we're going to flip it over. And that's just their cue to let them go, and they can just flex the vowel. Or flex the sounds. So I think that that's something that's helpful to just have it as a quick teach to get them to solve the words.
That's really helpful. I like that. And something that I did years ago too, I used to just like tap on my table real quick. Just tap, tap.
Like it's like the simplest things that just to get them that you don't have to stop and talk. And it's just, let's do it. Oh, okay. I need to flex it. And it'll help them once it's been explicitly taught, of course.
And sometimes our beginning readers, they don't even realize they made a mistake. They're spending so much of that cognitive load on the decoding where they're not stopping to think like, oh, wait, was that a real word? No, I just whipped through the sentence and read to the end. So it's a nice little cue of, wait, let's remember that reading is thinking and that this also has to make sense as we read. So let me see if I could be flexible with the way I pronounce this word. Do you have any specific teacher language that we can lean into? Any go-to phrases that teachers can use in the moment when they're helping students apply this skill?
So recently I've been working with my readers in an intervention setting who are still working within the closed syllable. And I like to present it to like this to them. So I'll say, okay, so you know that the letter A can spell a, okay? But it can also spell A. So then I might write on my little whiteboard the word tape on the board. And so we'll tap it out. App, is probably what they're going to say. Tap okay. So we'll get that out and they'll say tappa. That doesn't really make sense. And I'll say, okay, I'm going to use this in a sentence and let's see if we can figure this out. So I'll say, I used tappa to wrap the gift. So then I'll say, okay, so we know that doesn't sound right. So let's flex it. Let's flex the sound and we'll try that as a long A. T-A-P. And they might say tapa. But then when we use it back in the sentence, I used tape to wrap the gift, or even if I used tapa to wrap the gift, oftentimes they're going to say, oh, the word's tape. I used tape to wrap the gift. That makes sense. So it's just important to get the students to recognize various vowel sounds when you're doing this. And like we had talked about earlier, recognizing the various vowel sounds through phonemic awareness activities, those are so incredibly critical. We're huge proponents of exposing the students to a variety of sounds through PA practice. I've heard a lot of people talking about if you're in short A, you should be doing short A sounds. And that's perfectly legitimate when you're doing phoneme grapheme mapping. You're not going to have kids mapping sounds that they haven't been explicitly taught how to spell. But we call it priming the brain for getting ready for sounds. So they might need to know sounds like a, oi, aw, just getting them familiar with it through oral activities too. So that is a really important point that we did want to make.
Yeah. All of these sounds are in our students' oral vocabulary. We're just trying to bring in awareness, make them aware of the phonemes that we have. And you think about students that maybe you see an intervention and they're on a completely different scope back in the classroom. So I don't think there's any harm in that. People have very strong opinions about phonemic awareness, definitely.
I think they just have to be exposed. They have to know that the sound oi is a sound that you're going to be trying to figure out when you're reading. It is critical.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't want to pigeonhole ourselves by keeping students in short vowels, closed syllables for 3 years.
Yep.
I think it's really important when we're talking about this flexing piece, especially, as students get into multisyllabic words and the syllable division lines are not as clear and cut all the time. And, gosh, that looks like it's an open syllable and the vowel is short. So we have to get used to seeing different representations and trying out different vowel sounds. So I think some of that language like you use, flex it, just try it, try another sound. And if the short one didn't work, let's try the long one. If the long one didn't work, let's try a schwa sound.
And sometimes kids will really surprise you, even kids who are really impacted readers and really struggling readers, when they're reading it, because we do DIBELS universal screenings, and they can read words that haven't been explicitly, that have patterns that haven't been explicitly taught. And we're thinking it's due to the set for variability, and they can use the context. And so I think that this is helping them along to hopefully, like you said, speed it up, because sometimes kids are stuck in that closed syllable for a really, really long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to that example with my daughter, 5-year-old, she's reading AW words now. And she just had to read a couple times and now she knows AW are married. And that's it. They love each other. I love how you said that quote before, like the world is not decodable, right? So when we think about the application of set for variability in text selection, is this something that teachers should expect to use more so in decodable text or more so with grade level text once they transition into more grade level patterns or with both types of text? So what are your thoughts on that?
So our motto is it's not either or, it's both. So for beginning and struggling readers, decodable text is a non-negotiable. And as Jen said, the world is not decodable, but they have to be able to connect their phonics to connected text. That's where the decodable text is that bridge. Like, oh, I can read this word when I'm practicing on my letter cards, but I can also read it in my book. And so we want to give students decodable texts that are mostly decodable. Not every word in there is going to be decodable. And that's the perfect opportunity to apply that set for variability. So the reason we give these students their decodable text is because we want to build that confidence. We want to build that independence. We don't want the teacher to do all the heavy lifting and teaching into every word that they're reading, so that when a student comes to a word that doesn't match the pattern that they've learned yet, they can start to apply that set for variability. Once students have enough pattern and code under their belts and they're reading non-controlled text, now this set for variability isn't a brand new concept. They've already had plenty of practice with it. So when they're reading non-decodable text or non-controlled text, they can apply their set for variability right along with their decoding of all sorts of words. So an example of, again, like a decodable text, one of our stories that we wrote, one of the books that we wrote is called The Fox and the Dog. And a sentence in there is CVC pattern, right? The fox and the dog like to wag. Again, they're going to over apply that short vowel sound. They might say the fox and the dog lick to wag, but they've got most of those words that they could decode on their own. Those students who are more skilled, who have more exposure to patterns, might naturally flex it to like. The fox and the dog like to wag, as opposed to a student that might need some support. And you could say, oh, we haven't learned that pattern yet. IKE says Ike. Let's try that word. Again, it's not either decodable or non-controlled. You want to expose them right from the very beginning, this two-pronged approach. We're going to decode, but then if we come to a word that's not quite making it, we've got to flex. So yeah, a little bit of both.
It's a whole holistic approach. And I'm often on my soapbox for morphology. And as you ladies are chatting, I'm thinking about all of these morphologically complex words that students are encountering very early on in their careers. And we think of them as irregular, but they're not really quite irregular, and how this is kind of the perfect opportunity to talk about flexing too. You know, I think about a word like does, and truly it's that base word, do, do, with suffix es. And we have the completely regular word go to goes. Well, it goes from do to does. It's just the pronunciation shift. So sometimes students might want to read that word as do's. I do's my homework. Well, wait, that doesn't quite sound right. What words do I have in my oral language that can connect that? Because the structure is the same as other words that they're seeing and experiencing. It's just the pronunciation shift sometimes that happens in this crazy language, so rich and layered of ours, borrowed from all these different places. Pronunciation can get obscure at times. But so what's one big idea or one piece of advice you want to leave with teachers who want to begin supporting their students with set for variability?
So I think we have two big ideas, if that's okay. I think that the first thing we have to have more than one. Couldn't pick just one. So I think the first thing is that when you're selecting texts, particularly decodable texts for students and struggling readers and emergent readers, we need to select texts that will stretch them and not limit them. So we talk about decodable texts that are 100% decodable. So that means they contain all of the patterns that have been previously taught. And so that's not going to expose them, and that's not going to expose them to words that they could apply set for variability to. So I think that with the decodable texts, at a certain point, like we need to be looking at the words and making sure that kids might have the opportunity to try to use the set for variability process to solve some words that contain patterns that they haven't learned yet, or potentially irregular patterns. And there is a delicate balance, because we don't want to go to those decodables that have the majority of words. It's essentially just authentic text. We don't want the children to stop every few words to apply this process. It has to be mostly decodable. So that's why it's really important that teachers look at the books that they're reading with their kids and making sure that when they're selecting them, that they have that balance of decodable words and of words that they could use set for variability for. The last piece of advice is pretty simple. We would encourage teachers to not wait to apply set for variability. So you can do this at the CBC level. It is possible. And like we said, if you're picking texts that offer themselves to some words that we could be trying it out with, it's definitely something that's possible even at the CBC level.
Definitely. Those are such great takeaways for this episode. And when we hear set for variability and this vowel flexing, our minds automatically go to the multisyllabic and thinking like, oh gosh, we have to shift our pronunciation in some of those syllables. But it can be done so much earlier, and it gets students in the habit of flexing their sounds earlier on. And you gave so many wonderful primary level examples of different experiences that you've had with children where you've seen this in action, even at those very early levels. So I think that's a really important takeaway for all teachers to have. So I really appreciate everything that you had to share. This was such a valuable episode, and I'm sure that people would love to connect with you further. So where can they find you?
So as I mentioned way back in the beginning, Jen and I have been working on our blog, writing a blog since 2016. So the blog is informedliteracy.com. And on that blog post, we also have a shop where you can find our decodable books. Jen is also on Instagram. She's the guru. I am not the guru on Instagram. And it's
far from it.
At Informed Lit. And then we also have just started recently a YouTube channel also called at Informed Lit. We're really excited about our decodable books that we published. They're available in our shop. And we also, for your listeners, have a limited coupon that we would like to offer. When they purchase a set of decodable books, they can get a supplemental resource pack. It's got a $20 value, but it's got all those things that we've talked about, the black and white copies of printable books. They also have vocabulary pages and spelling and sentence scrambles and word lists. So everything you need for small group instruction is right there at your fingertips. We also work with schools. We accept purchase orders. And then the last thing is, if teachers want a sneak peek, we have a freebie that we could offer them as well, which is a condensed version of our supplemental resource pack.
Beautiful. Yeah. I love it. We can link that all in the show notes. And great. I was just telling Jen and Wendy how I got my hands on a set of their decodables, and they're so beautiful. I love them so much. Thank you. There are definitely, I'm sure teachers would love to have access to those in their classrooms. And it's nice to have printables, but it's also nice to hold a book in your hand.
It makes readers really feel like, those beginning readers, like, I'm a real reader, you know? It changes their whole emotion, I think, when they're reading a real book, you know?
Definitely. So this has been such a joy. Thank you so much for joining me, Jen and Wendy.
Thanks Michelle. Thanks.
Thank you so much for tuning into Literacy in Color. I hope today's episode left you feeling both inspired and equipped with something new to add to your teaching toolkit. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would truly mean so much to me if you'd leave a 5-star review. It helps other educators find the show and join our colorful community. And don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. For more tips, tools, and resources, be sure to check out the links in the show notes at michelleandthecolorfulclassroom.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week. Until then, be colorful and teach colorfully.